2 generals, 4 colonels, 3 lieutenant colonels, 3 majors, all dead in a single strike, not over the course of a battle, not across multiple engagements, scattered through days of war in one hit from one weapon before anyone in that building had a chance to move. This is not a statistic. This is the highest single strike officer casualty toll the United States military has suffered in decades, and the weapon that produced it did not come from a conventional ballistic trajectory. It did not follow a path that any radar system was designed to predict. It came in at Mach 13. It maneuvered, and it arrived before the sirens could finish their first cycle. The weapon was Iran's Fattah-2, and what happened in that moment did not just kill 12 American officers. It exposed something far more troubling about where the United States now stands. In a war it did not fully anticipate fighting at this intensity. To understand the significance of what occurred, you need to understand where this conflict started and how fast it escalated beyond what the planning documents assumed was possible. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes against Iran under Operation Epic Fury. The stated objective was the dismantling of Iran's nuclear infrastructure and the degradation of its advanced missile capabilities. The operation was framed publicly as surgical, precise, and strategically calculated. What nobody said out loud was that it was also a race against time, because Iran had weapons in its arsenal that, if used in volume, would rewrite the operational assumptions of every base, every command center, and every forward-deployed American unit in the region. Within hours of the first U.S. and Israeli strikes, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched its counter-response. The early waves were deliberate, not chaotic. Iran began with lower-tier ballistic missiles, hundreds of them, launched in successive barges across the Gulf. The logic was not random destruction. It was calculated attrition. Force the American Patriot batteries to fire, make them spend interceptors, drain the magazines before the more consequential weapons arrived. That pattern should have triggered immediate alarm. It did not produce a sufficient response. By March 1st, the first Fattah was already in the air. Iranian state media confirmed that the original Fattah, equipped with a maneuverable re-entry vehicle, had been launched as part of the 11th wave of strikes. The URG stated at the time that it had penetrated Israel's multi-layer air defense network. They called it the beginning of the end of the mythical missile defense shield. They were being precise, not theatrical, and then came the Fattah-2. The Fattah-2 is not simply a faster version of the Fattah-1. It is architecturally different. The original Fattah uses a maneuverable re-entry vehicle which is capable of limited course corrections during descent. It complicates interception, but it still follows a broadly predictable atmospheric entry. The Fattah-2 does not. It carries a hypersonic glide vehicle, a fundamentally distinct payload class that does not fall toward its target. It glides. It maneuvers laterally and in pitch. It can sustain atmospheric skip-glide flight across its entire terminal phase. It approaches from directions that do not correspond to its launch trajectory. Iran unveiled the Fattah-2 in November 2023. At the time, Western analysts debated its precise classification. Whether it constituted a true hypersonic glide vehicle or an enhanced maneuverable re-entry vehicle remained contested. Some assessments argued that Iran had not yet conducted enough documented flight tests to validate the highest performance claims. Others pointed to the visible structural differences from the Fattah-1 and drew connections to North Korean hypersonic glide vehicle programs, specifically the Hwasong-16B, which entered service in 2024 after flight testing that began in September 2021. What the debate missed was the operational timeline. Iran was not building the Fattah-2 to display it. It was building it to use it. And on March 1, 2026, it did exactly that. When the Fattah-2 launches, a solid fuel booster ignites and accelerates the vehicle to hypersonic velocity within seconds. That first stage burns hard, then separates. What remains is the hypersonic glide vehicle itself, now traveling at speeds between Mach 13 and Mach 15, roughly 18,000 km per hour. At that velocity, a target 1,400 km away is reached in under 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, a Patriot battery must detect the launch, classify the trajectory, determine an intercept point, achieve a firing solution, launch interceptors, and guide them to a target that is simultaneously changing course. The math does not work. Not against a maneuvering hypersonic glide vehicle. Not with current interceptor technology. The Patriot system was designed for ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. It operates on the principle of flying faster than the threat against conventional ballistic trajectories. That principle holds against a vehicle traveling at Mach 15 and maneuvering laterally during terminal descent. It does not. The intercept velocity required to catch a Mach 10 target would demand a defense system moving at Mach 30 in the atmosphere with the friction forces involved. That is not achievable. This is not analysis from critics of the program. This is the assessment of Yuval Basesi, Vice President of Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, the company that builds Israel's primary missile defense architecture. He said it in August 2025. He said it publicly. He compared trying to intercept a hypersonic missile with a single interceptor to assigning one basketball player to defend LeBron James. You will not stop it. What Basesi proposed instead was a zone defense model. Multiple interceptors prepositioned to cover defined airspace sectors and engage threats as they enter. Effective in concept, not operationally fielded, not by Israel, not by the United States, not anywhere in the region in time for this conflict. Now consider what that gap meant when the Fattah-2 was aimed at an American command facility. The details of the strike confirm a level of precision that went beyond simply penetrating air defenses. 12 senior officers were killed, 2 generals, 4 colonels, 3 lieutenant colonels, 3 majors. The nature of that casualty breakdown tells you something critical about the target. This was not a logistics hub. This was not a supply depot. The rank concentration indicates a forward command center, an operational headquarters where decision makers were collocated. A node, strike that node, and you do not just kill 12 people. You remove the command layer that coordinates battlefield operations across an entire theater. That is exactly what the Fattah-2 was designed to find and destroy. The precision guidance integrated into its glide vehicle, combining inertial navigation with preloaded terrain and trajectory shaping, allows it to strike hardened structures with a degree of accuracy that conventional ballistic missiles cannot match at the same speed. The warhead penetrates before the defense system can confirm whether the inbound contact is a threat or a false return. This was not the only time the Fattah-2 demonstrated this capability during the conflict. Earlier on March 4th, Iranian strikes using the Fattah-2 against an Israeli Defense Forces command center killed 7 senior IDF officers. Footage from the site showed impact patterns consistent with a high-velocity direct strike on a fortified structure. Analysts noted that the trajectory and terminal speed bore unmistakable similarities to the profile of Russia's Orosnik hypersonic system used against Ukrainian targets. The comparison was not incidental. Both systems solved the same problem in the same way. Arrive fast enough that no defense response is physically possible. The pattern forming across these strikes is now undeniable. Iran is not using the Fattah-2 as a signal. It is using it as a command decapitation instrument. That capability interacts with a crisis in American air defense that predates this conflict but has now become acute. Before Operation Epic Fury began, the United States entered this engagement with Patriot surface-to-air missile inventories already reduced to approximately 25% of the Pentagon stated minimum requirement. That depletion was the accumulated result of 2 separate pressures: prolonged donations to Ukraine and the expenditure of over 150 THAAD interceptors during 12 days of U.S.-Israeli strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities in June 2025. Each THAAD interceptor costs approximately $15 million. The global production rate of THAAD interceptors is roughly 96 per year. The United States used a full quarter of its global THAAD stockpile. In 12 days in June 2025, that figure was already alarming. Nobody fixed it in the months that followed. In the first 5 days of Operation Epic Fury alone, the U.S. military expended over 800 Patriot interceptors. That number exceeds the total number of Patriot missiles fired during the entire Russian-Ukrainian war, which at that point had lasted nearly 3 years at approximately $3 million per interceptor. 5 days of defense against Iran's ballistic missile barges cost an estimated $2.4 billion. The burn rate was not sustainable for 1 week, let alone the duration of a sustained conflict. Al-Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the primary forward deployment site for U.S. Patriot systems in the region, took confirmed direct hits from Iranian ballistic missiles. Satellite imagery taken after the strikes showed significant structural damage across the facility. Video footage circulated showing Patriot interceptors launching from the base and failing to reach their targets. The missiles passed through the defensive envelope. They landed. The system that was supposed to stop them spent $12 million in those seconds and produced no result. 2 anti-P2 radar systems, which form the sensor backbone of THAAD batteries, were destroyed in Iranian strikes. Those radars are not interchangeable components. Losing them does not just degrade the battery. It eliminates its targeting function entirely. Without the radar, the interceptors become inert, and the United States does not have an immediate replacement inventory that can be fielded in the middle of active combat operations. The response to these shortages has been 2 stripped defenses from elsewhere. Patriot batteries are being withdrawn from South Korea, transported by U.S. Air Force C-17s from Ozen Air Force Base, and repositioned toward the Middle East theater. The strategic logic is understandable. The strategic cost is severe. South Korea sits within range of North Korean ballistic and hypersonic missiles. Its defensive architecture depends on the Patriot systems now being physically removed from the peninsula to compensate for losses Iran has forced. The redeployment solves one problem by creating another in a different theater. The global response to these developments has been measured in tone and sharp in implication. China's official position on the U.S.-Iran conflict is described as objective and impartial. Beijing has not broken from that framing, but Chinese military analysts observing the performance of U.S. missile defense systems against Iranian hypersonic weapons have noted publicly that the engagements confirm earlier assessments about the fundamental limitations of Patriot and THAAD against maneuvering hypersonic targets. That is not a neutral academic observation. China has its own hypersonic glide vehicle programs, more advanced and more numerous than Iran's. What Iran has demonstrated in combat, China has documented. China's calculation regarding Taiwan, regarding the South China Sea, regarding any future confrontation with U.S. naval and air assets, now incorporates verified data points about how American air defenses perform against the class of weapons Beijing has been fielding for years. Russia's response has been diplomatic in public and instructive in private. The Kremlin has described the conflict as one that should never have been initiated. Sergei Lavrov stated that he saw no evidence Tehran was pursuing nuclear weapons, but the more consequential Russian perspective is institutional. Russia has watched its own Ornik hypersonic system be compared favorably by independent analysts to the Fattah-2 terminal behavior. Both systems produce similar impact signatures. Both operate beyond the intercept threshold of current Western defensive architecture. For Russia, the Iranian conflict has functioned as a public validation exercise for an entire class of weapons that NATO's planning structure has not yet found a credible answer to. The United States now faces a convergence of pressures that the opening assumptions of Operation Epic Fury did not account for. The interceptor stockpile is depleted. Radar infrastructure has been degraded. A command facility was struck, and 12 senior officers were killed in a single hypersonic event. The weapon responsible cannot be reliably intercepted with systems currently deployed, and the adversary that used it has made clear through the sequential escalation of its strike packages that the Fattah-2 is not the ceiling of its capability, it is the current threshold. What the Fattah-2 killing 12 American officers in one strike represents is not simply a battlefield loss. It represents a capabilities crossover. Iran has demonstrated that it can penetrate American protected airspace, strike a high-value command node with precision at hypersonic velocity, and remove an entire tier of operational leadership in seconds. The defense systems tasked with preventing exactly that outcome failed, not because the crews operating them were inadequate, but because the geometry of the engagement, the speed, the maneuverability, the compressed decision window exceeded what those systems were designed to handle. The Fattah-2 is not new. It was unveiled more than 2 years before it was first used in combat. The engineering challenges it solved, the skin temperatures above 2,000 degrees C, the aerodynamic control surfaces operating at hypersonic velocities, the guidance precision at terminal phase. None of that happened overnight. Iran built this capability systematically, in full view of Western intelligence over years, and when the moment came, it worked. The question that has no comfortable answer right now is not whether the United States can rebuild its interceptor stockpile. It can eventually at significant cost and over significant time. The question is what Iran does next with a weapon that has already proven it can reach targets that American air defense was supposed to make unreachable. 2 generals are dead, 4 colonels, 3 lieutenant colonels, 3 majors killed by a single weapon in a single moment that the entire architecture of American missile defense was unable to prevent. That is not the end of the story. It is the point at which the assumptions that drove it finally broke.